constitutional muster under the First Amendment? Does someone have a First Amendment right to publish, assemble, and speak, even when it may cause others to react in a potentially violent way? Intuitively, you think the answer to that is yes. Otherwise, you wouldn't have free speech, right? What if the speech you wish to use will cause others to create violence unlawfully? Do we lose that First Amendment right? Remember, fighting words are those which by their very utterance inflict injury or tend to incite an immediate breach of the peace. Those are not protected by the First Amendment. Does that fit here in this hypothetical? Will the publishing of the cartoon inflict injury to the Muslim world or tend to incite an immediate breach of peace? And if that's the case, wouldn't those cartoons and perhaps other offensive speech through no intent of the speaker constitute fighting words outside the scope of the First Amendment? Intent of the speaker is considered when there are true threats of violence, which are outside the scope of the First Amendment. True threats are those statements where the speaker means to communicate a serious expression of an intent to commit an act of unlawful violence to a particular individual or group of individuals. The speaker need not actually carry out the threat or intend to carry out the threat. The prohibition on true threats protects individuals from the fear of violence, in addition to the possibility that it will occur. For example, Virginia has a ban on cross burning, and it was held not to violate the First Amendment. Cross burning is considered also speech by the United States Supreme Court. But that case addressed where the speech itself was threatening. So it does not seem to fit the fact pattern involving the cartoon, which in of itself is not threatening. As to the cartoon being published, doesn't matter what the author intends. What about someone taking the offensive book, running a knife through it, and sticking it on the door of a mosque? That starts to sound more like someone intending to immediately breach the peace that would fall outside the protection of the First Amendment. But what if the author truly believed it's just a cartoon? It's funny, educationally relevant, and I believe the Muslims are law-abiding people and would not react in a way that would cause a problem. And if the author really believes that, even though all the evidence demonstrates that that's really not the case, that rioting would occur and lives would be lost, does the government violate the First Amendment by shutting the publication down? Putting it another way, everyone here wants their First Amendment rights to be protected, to have free speech. But are you willing for your kids to be killed? For someone else to have a right to have a cartoon published? Soldiers have died and die every day to protect our right for free speech. Must innocent people die as well? Or may the government intervene to prevent that harm, even though it would take away speech in the process? I can spin hypotheticals and ask questions all day because that's my job. And I'm sure you could probably think of better ones. But the point is, the greenhouse conditions, I believe, are right for various hypotheticals to actually present themselves in real situations. That's why, from the bench, we do ask hypotheticals, because real cases do arise from hypotheticals. I hope this one does not occur, but others will arise. And in my view, the black letter law on free speech from the United States Supreme Court is somewhat difficult to decipher. There are many plurality opinions and fractured majority opinions that are hard to piece together from various separate opinions. So I don't come tonight prepared with answers to all the various questions that I raise and how it will turn out. Does that concern you? It concerns me. That's why I believe the First Amendment to the United States Constitution is the most important constitutional issue facing our country at this point in time. God bless you, the state of Florida, the United States, and may His grace rest upon us all. Question and answer, but there will be no tailoring involved, I promise. Unless you try to pack it. Yes, sir.
The court upheld the right of Nazis to parade in a Jewish town in Skokie, Illinois, and Klansmen to march even in minority neighborhoods. Is the situation at Yale analogous to that in a sense, and that violence could have occurred because of those parades?
My hope is that when you think about situations like that, and you also think back of what happened in the 60s, we had the civil rights movement and free speech. There were fires burning in cities. There was violence occurring in some places, but we had police out and sometimes soldiers out to help keep the law. So my hope would be that the constitutional First Amendment would prevail and that our violence would be able to be contained because if we start restricting our constitutional rights, that's very troublesome. Yes, sir.
If there's anywhere that we should be allowed to speak freely in, I think it should be at a public university that we have to help pay for, right? But last year, when Bill Ayers came to campus, the college Republicans decided to hold a protest against it. And about 10 minutes into it, armed police officers told us that we were outside the freedom of speech zone and that we had to go to a zone far away that wasn't even visible from the event. And I just want to know how that could be possibly constitutional, and has the Supreme Court made a ruling on that?
Let me enter a caveat. I cannot speak to any potential fact patterns that you may be aware of. I don't know, I'm not familiar with the case you're talking about, but if it is a case or it could come before our court, I can't speak to it because then I would have prejudged the case, and then I would be recused from hearing the case, and I wouldn't want that to occur because I need to fulfill my obligations to the court to be able to hear cases. So I'm not familiar with that particular case, so I really can't speak to it. I'm sorry.
What about freedom of speech zones in general? They said it is.
Well, yeah, I hope so. The university setting generally has been always traditionally seen as one of the places where free speech is very keenly protected. So university settings, parks, public settings, and all those kind of places, or where free speech can take place. But, as I said before, there are time, place, and manner restrictions. It's not that you can just show up anywhere, anytime, and say what you want all the time. Sometimes there are certain restrictions. You couldn't have a total disruption of the campus, for example. If you try to come into my law school class that I teach here at the school, and showed up demonstrating the first time, I'd probably, figure it out. But if you shut it down eventually, every single class, that would disrupt the whole class setting. So eventually, there'd have to be some kind of control so that the students who pay tuition can actually be educated. So there are some reasonable time, place, and manner that take place.